Have you ever wondered how a soldier managed to fall asleep inside the vast, cold walls of a medieval castle during the long winters when the air itself seemed to freeze and the nights stretched endlessly? Tonight, we will step quietly into that world. We will move slowly, one detail at a time, through the dimly lit barracks, the echoing halls, and the shadowy chambers where soldiers tried, often unsuccessfully, to find rest. Our journey will not be rushed. It will drift, like a soft whisper through stone corridors, so that as you listen, you may sink deeper into calm, just as they sank into uneasy sleep hundreds of years ago. A castle in winter was not a place of comfort. Its walls, though thick and strong, were built for defense, not for warmth. Each stone held the chill of the night, radiating cold back into the rooms. The deeper you walked into the castle, the more you felt the weight of silence and frost. Fires burned only in certain chambers, and even then they gave off little warmth compared to the vast emptiness of the rooms around them. For soldiers, who often slept far from the great halls of lords and nobles, the fire was more a memory than a reality. Imagine the soldier's bed, not a soft mattress, not a feather pillow, but a pile of straw. Straw gathered from fields, bundled loosely, and spread unevenly across the floor of the barracks. It scratched, it smelled of the earth, and it offered little more than a barrier between the body and the stone beneath. On nights when snow pressed against the castle walls, that straw became stiff and damp, yet it was all the soldier had. He lay down upon it, wrapped in his cloak, sometimes pulling his hood over his head to keep in what little heat his breath provided. The cloak itself was no luxury garment. It was wool, heavy and rough to the skin. It carried the smell of smoke from campfires, the smell of dampness from the winter air, and sometimes the iron tang of sweat and steel. But it was a soldier's best defense against the cold. The cloak could be wrapped tightly around the shoulders, pulled across the chest, tucked beneath the legs, and used as both blanket and shield against the night. Some soldiers kept their boots on as they slept, unwilling to let the cold creep in from the floor. Others, fearing sudden alarms, kept a piece of armor strapped in place, even in their rest. Sleep was never entirely safe, and warmth was never entirely enough. The barracks itself was alive with the quiet sounds of men trying to endure the night. You might hear the rustle of straw as one soldier turned in his sleep. You might hear the cough of another, echoing softly in the still air. Breathing grew heavy, slow, and uneven as men drifted in and out of slumber. The room smelled of wool, leather, and smoke. It was not pleasant, but it was familiar. It was survival. Sometimes soldiers gathered close together, their cloaks overlapping, their shoulders pressed side by side. It was not comfort, but necessity. Human warmth, the shared body heat of many men lying close, was the simplest and most reliable shield against freezing air. Soldiers understood this instinctively. Alone, a man shivered. Together, he might sleep. Far above them, the wind hissed through narrow arrow slits, the very openings built to defend the castle, now serving as passageways for winter's breath. The sound of the wind was constant, like a slow whistle through the stones. Sometimes it carried the faint smell of snow, sometimes the creak of distant timbers, sometimes the eerie cry of an owl circling the towers outside. But for the soldier, lying on his straw bed, wrapped in cloak and half dreaming of morning, the wind was a lullaby and a warning all at once. And so, night after night, the ritual repeated. The laying down of the cloak, the curling into the straw, the quiet endurance of the cold. A soldier's sleep was not deep, but it was enough. Enough to carry him into the next day, enough to restore a measure of strength, enough to survive until spring returned. Have you ever tried to imagine the long hours of a winter night in a medieval castle, not from the view of a lord seated by a fire, but through the weary eyes of the soldier lying in the barracks, struggling to rest against the weight of the cold. Tonight, we will wander slowly through those nights again, step by step, detail by detail, until we begin to understand how a soldier passed the hours between dusk and dawn. We will not rush. We will move gently, as if walking by candlelight, so that the telling itself becomes as steady and quiet as the nights we are describing. In the stillness after sunset, the castle shifted its rhythm. The noise of daytime life, the clatter of hooves in the yard, the shouts of men drilling, the banging of hammers in the smithy grew quieter, replaced by the measured voices of guards reporting for duty. Soldiers not chosen for the watch were dismissed to the barracks, where their greatest challenge was not battle, but the endless winter night. For them, sleep was a task, a duty of its own. It was never certain, never comfortable, but always necessary. The barracks were long, narrow rooms with beams of dark wood above and hard stone below. The air inside was heavy, carrying the scent of sweat, smoke, and damp straw. Beds were nothing, more than piles of straw laid in uneven rows along the floor. Sometimes the straw was fresh, cut from nearby fields, its smell faintly sweet, a small comfort. But more often it was stale, pressed flat, mixed with dirt, dust, and the crawling presence of lice. No soldier expected it to be otherwise. They lay down upon it as men had done before them, pulling their woolen cloaks tight against their shoulders. The cloak was their closest companion in winter. Thick, coarse, and heavy, it was a shield against the icy air. Soldiers wrapped themselves in it as tightly as they could, curling into the fabric until little more than their breath was visible, rising in faint clouds. Some kept their boots on as they slept, unwilling to let the cold creep into their feet from the stones below. Others went to bed still half-armored, keeping a breastplate or helmet nearby, ready for a sudden alarm. To remove too much clothing was to invite the chill of the night to sink into the body. Sleep was always balanced between warmth and readiness. The barracks were not silent. They carried the restless sounds of men forced to sleep in close company. The rustle of cloaks and straw was constant, small adjustments made in search of comfort. One man might snore, his breath loud and uneven, while another coughed, his lungs irritated by the dust. Murmurs rose from dreaming lips, words half-formed and quickly lost. The scratching of nails against irritated skin echoed as lice and fleas tormented tired bodies. And always there was the rhythm of breathing, dozens of men inhaling and exhaling together, a strange chorus that filled the room like the rise and fall of waves. Beyond the barracks, the sounds of the castle itself drifted through the night. Guards patrolled the walls, their boots striking stone with steady rhythm, a sound as regular as the tolling of a bell. The wind pressed against the towers, moaning through narrow arrow slits, rattling shutters, whistling like a voice that never ceased. On some nights, wolves howled in the forests beyond the walls, their cries carrying over the ramparts. On others, owls called from the towers, their notes hollow and mournful. Soldiers lying awake beneath their cloaks knew these sounds as well as their own heartbeats. They did not frighten them. They were simply part of the night. The smell of the barracks was its own memory. It was a mix of wool cloaks damp with sweat, leather straps that never fully dried, straw beginning to rot, and the faint smoke of the brazier placed at the center of the room. The brazier hissed and glowed, giving off a circle of warmth that never reached far enough. Men closest to it felt their faces warmed even as their backs remained cold. Those farther away could only see its light flicker, offering no comfort at all. Fuel was too precious to waste. Fires in the barracks were kept small, and wood was saved for the kitchens or the Lord's hall. Soldiers learned to endure the cold, more often than escape it. Sometimes they huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, sharing body heat. Men lay close, their cloaks overlapping, their breaths mingling in the air. It was not dignity, It was not comfort, but it kept them alive. To sleep alone was to shiver until dawn. To sleep pressed against comrades was to find at least a little warmth. This simple act of survival was as old as war itself, and though it was rarely spoken of, it was understood by all. Food, too, shaped the night. Evening meals were simple: stews of barley or peas, coarse bread, sometimes a bit of salted meat or cheese. The warmth of the food lingered in the body for an hour or two, helping the men to drift into slumber. But as the night grew longer, the heat faded, leaving only emptiness and hunger. Stomachs growled quietly in the dark. Dreams often carried men back to thoughts of feasts, of hearths, of the smell of roasting meat, things that rarely reached their humble palates. A soldier who woke in the night often woke hungry as well, but there was no remedy. He pulled his cloak tighter and turned over on the straw, letting hunger become another shadow of the night. Time passed slowly in the barracks. Without clocks or candles enough to mark the hours, men measured the night by sound and feeling. The shift of guards told them when the middle of the night had come. The paling of the torch flame marked the slow approach of dawn. Sometimes, the crow of a rooster in the stables signaled the last stretch of darkness. But to a soldier lying awake, staring at the dim rafters, the hours felt endless. The mind wandered, circling through thoughts of home, of battles fought and battles to come, of loved ones left behind. These thoughts were as persistent as the cold. They could not be banished, only endured. Dreams came unevenly, shallow and broken. Men dreamed of warmth, of lying beneath blankets by a hearth, of walking through summer fields. They dreamed of battles, their minds replaying the clash of swords, the cries of comrades, the fear of death. They dreamed of silence, of nothing at all, only to wake suddenly at a noise and find themselves still in the barracks, still surrounded by stone and cold. Dream and waking blended together until it was hard to know which was more real. At times, there were interruptions. A shout from a guard at the gate. The blast of a horn carried into the night. A sudden alarm, real or imagined, that sent men scrambling for weapons, fumbling with buckles, rushing half asleep to their posts. Such moments reminded them why they never slept too deeply, why they kept armor near at hand. The enemy was always a possibility, even in the deepest winter, even in the stillest hour. After such alarms, men found it even harder to return to sleep. They lay awake for hours, listening to the silence, waiting for dawn. But dawn always came. Slowly, almost reluctantly, light crept into the barracks through narrow windows and cracks in the shutters. The gray of morning replaced the black of night. The brazier's embers glowed faintly, almost gone. Soldiers stirred, stretching limbs stiff from cold. Straw rustled as men sat up, cloaks falling from their shoulders. Sleep had been uneven, broken, but it was enough to carry them into another day. Another day of drills, of guard duty, of endless waiting, and another night, just like the one before, already waiting to return. This was the rhythm of life in a medieval castle during winter. It was not filled with warmth or comfort. It was filled with survival, with the small, persistent efforts to find rest in the face of stone, cold, and silence. The soldier's bed was not a place of dreams, but a place of endurance. And yet, through all the long nights, through all the bitter winds and sleepless hours, they endured. Because they had to. Because there was no other choice. Have you ever wondered what a medieval soldier saw and felt in the middle of the night, when he opened his eyes in the barracks, half asleep, listening to the endless sounds of winter? Tonight, in this next part of our slow journey, we will move gently through the castle at night, not in the daylight of kings and battles, but in the dim, flickering hours when most of the world lay still. Before we drift into the details, I would like to ask you a quiet question. If you are enjoying this slow exploration of medieval nights, if you find it calming, or even a little bit fascinating, let me know in the comments. Your thoughts help shape these stories, and I would love to hear whether you would like more. Tales of castles, soldiers, and the quiet rhythms of history told in this calm way. You can share them when you are awake and rested. For now, simply listen, and let the night carry us further back into the past. A soldier's sleep was always fragile. The barracks were crowded, the straw uncomfortable, the air heavy with the smell of men and smoke. But sometimes the night pushed them awake, and for a moment they would lie there, staring into the dimness. What did they see? Perhaps a faint glow from the brazier, the embers flickering like dying stars. Perhaps the shape of rafters overhead, rough wood darkened by years of smoke. Perhaps the slow rise and fall of their comrades' shoulders, men, wrapped in cloaks, curled like children against the cold. The soldier turned his head and listened. The sound of breathing surrounded him, deep, shallow, steady, uneven. One man snored loudly, his voice echoing against the walls. Another muttered something from a dream, his words lost to the air. Someone coughed, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of smoke and sickness. The straw rustled as another shifted, turning over, seeking warmth. It was a chorus of small sounds, each ordinary, but together creating a rhythm that filled the night. Outside, the castle whispered with its own sounds. The wind never rested. It moved through arrow slits and down corridors, whistling, moaning, sometimes shrieking against the stone. The wood of the gates creaked as it swelled in the damp, groaning like a giant in its sleep. Dogs barked in the yard, their voices sharp against the night air, before quiet returned. From the stables came the soft thud of a hoof, the snort of a horse shifting in its stall. The castle was never truly silent. It was alive, even in the darkest hours. And then there were the smaller, more unsettling noises, the skittering of mice along the edges of the barracks, the scratching of claws against stone as rats searched for crumbs, the sudden flutter of a bat startled from the rafters above. To modern ears, such noises might seem unbearable, but for the soldiers they were simply part of life, so ordinary that they barely stirred at the sound. Only the new recruit, still unaccustomed to the realities of castle nights, might shiver or pull his cloak tighter. The older men slept on, indifferent. What about the air itself? The air of the barracks was thick and cold. The smoke from the brazier clung low, never quite escaping, leaving a faint haze that irritated the eyes and throat. The scent of wool cloaks damp with sweat and frost lingered, mixed with the smell of leather, of metal, of bodies unwashed for days. To sleep in such air was not refreshing. It was heavy, pressing down like the very stones of the castle, and yet the men adapted. Their bodies accepted it as normal, just as they accepted the straw, the lice, the cold. When the soldier closed his eyes again, sleep came slowly, drifting in fragments. He dreamed shallow dreams, half waking, half wandering. In his dreams, he saw fires that never went out, tables spread with food that never emptied, fields of green where the sun never hid. But always, the dream shifted back to reality. The cold, the stone, the endless duties waiting at dawn. His mind could never escape fully, even in sleep. The castle was always with him. Hours passed this way, measured not by clocks but by the body. A change in the guard outside, the sound of new boots, on the stones, signaled the middle of the night. The brazier's glow dimmed further, embers sinking into ash. The air grew colder, each breath sharper. Some men shifted closer to one another, seeking warmth. Others wrapped their cloaks tighter, pulling hoods down low. No one spoke. The silence of exhaustion held them all. In these hours, when the night was deepest, the soldier's thoughts grew heavy. He thought of home, of family far away, of the bed he once knew, softer than straw, warmer than cloaks. He thought of battles yet to come, of enemies beyond the walls, of the horn that might sound at any moment. He thought of death, always near, always possible. And sometimes he thought of nothing at all, his mind empty, drifting like the smoke above the brazier. At last, the slow approach of dawn began. A faint gray light crept through the narrow windows, soft but steady. The rooster crowed in the stables. The guards changed again, their voices echoing faintly in the yard. The barracks stirred. Men shifted, groaned, rubbed at tired eyes. Cloaks were pulled tighter for one last moment of warmth before the day began. The night had been endured, if not conquered. Sleep had been thin, broken, but enough. It was always just enough. And as the soldier rose, brushing straw from his cloak, tightening his belt, he knew that tonight would be the same. The same cold, the same straw, the same chorus of breathing and wind and silence. It was not comfort, it was not peace, but it was life. And life, in the end, was what mattered. So when you think of medieval castles, think not only of battles and banners, but of these nights. Think of the soldier lying awake on straw, listening to the wind, enduring the cold. Think of the quiet, the patience, the endless repetition of survival. For it is in these moments, more than in the clash of swords or the roar of fire, that the true rhythm of medieval life is found. And if this quiet journey has helped you drift towards sleep, or if it has sparked your curiosity about the small forgotten details of history, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what else you would like to hear. What other corners of history you would like to explore in this calm, unhurried way. I will be glad to guide you there, one slow step at a time. Until then, let the night of the castle fade into your dreams, carrying with it the quiet endurance of those who slept within its walls long ago. Have you ever imagined what it felt like to live through a winter that seemed endless, where the days were short and the nights seemed to stretch forever? For the medieval soldier, winter was not just a season. It was a test of patience, endurance, and the quiet ability to adapt. In this part of our journey, we will sink even deeper into the long winter nights of the castle, where sleep came slowly, and where every sound, every draft of wind, carried a meaning. As you listen, let your thoughts drift gently. There is no rush, no need to focus too sharply. Let the images form slowly, like shadows lengthening on the stone walls, and allow yourself to rest in the rhythm of the past. The soldier lies on his straw bed, wrapped in his cloak, but the cold still seeps through. No fire is close enough to warm every man in the barracks. The brazier glows faintly, but it does little against the thick chill of the night. Around him, others shift and sigh. Some curl tightly into themselves, hands tucked into sleeves, noses pressed into wool. Others spread out, used to discomfort, their bodies as unbothered as the stones themselves. The night outside is restless. Wind lashes against the walls, rattling shutters and slipping through cracks. It whistles through arrow slits, a thin, ghostly sound. Snow falls silently, but its weight gathers on rooftops and battlements, pressing down on wood, bending beams. Sometimes a clump slides free, crashing to the ground below with a muffled thud that startles even the drowsiest soldier. The soldier listens to these sounds, not with alarm, but with a weary familiarity. Every winter has its own voice, and he has learned to hear it. The castle groans, the wind moans, the animals shift. Each sound is a reminder. The world continues even when men try to rest. But sleep is stubborn. The straw beneath him scratches. Tiny movements tickle his skin, lice and fleas never truly gone. The air smells of smoke and sweat, sour and heavy, and every breath feels weighted. He closes his eyes, opens them again, and stares at the ceiling. Shadows flicker above where bats stir, where smoke curls, where the light of the brazier rises and falls. Time is impossible to measure. Hours feel like minutes, minutes like hours. He remembers stories told by older soldiers of men who froze to death even inside the walls, of guards who nodded off at their posts and never woke. Such tales are warnings, but also strangely comforting. They remind him that suffering is shared, that every man here feels the same sharp cold, the same restless weight of winter. He is not alone, even when wakefulness makes him feel isolated in the dark. Sometimes the silence breaks with voices. A soldier mutters in his dreams, half words, names of family or enemies, too soft to understand. Another cries out suddenly, a nightmare tearing through his rest before he quiets again, breathing fast. No one comforts him. No one speaks. Each man carries his dreams alone as he carries his burdens by day. The hours move forward slowly, marked only by changes in the brazier. A soldier stirs it, pushing the embers, adding a log if one remains. The crackle of flames is a relief, but also a reminder that wood is precious. Fires must be rationed, warmth carefully guarded. Every log burned tonight is one less for tomorrow. The men feel this truth even as they bask in the brief heat, and so they drift in and out of shallow sleep. Dreams blur with reality. A soldier feels the cold against his face and imagines a snowy field. He hears the creak of wood and imagines a ship sailing distant seas. He smells smoke and imagines a battlefield. Sleep is never deep, never free, but it is enough to carry him through the night. What of the guards outside, pacing the walls? There, sleep will come later, after hours of watch. For them, the night is even harsher. The wind bites harder on the battlements. Snow clings to their cloaks. Their beards frost over. Their fingers ache despite gloves. They stamp their feet to keep blood moving, grip their spears tightly to stay awake. They whisper to each other, short words, fragments of thought, not for conversation, but for survival. To stand alone in silence would be unbearable. Together, even in silence, they endure. Inside, the soldier half dreams of warmer days. He imagines spring, the thaw of snow, the scent of wet earth, the sound of rivers rushing free. He imagines lying in grass rather than straw, hearing birds instead of wind. These dreams are distant, but they are what carry him through the longest nights. He knows winter will not last forever, even if tonight it feels endless. The night grows darker still before it grows lighter. The brazier is nearly out, only faint embers glowing now. The air is sharp, every breath colder than the last. A man coughs, shivering violently, pulling his cloak tighter. Another mutters a prayer, quiet but firm, words that hang in the air, like frost. The soldier listens but does not join. His prayers are silent, unspoken, known only to himself. At last, the faintest hint of dawn creeps in. The gray light slips through the narrow slits in the wall. Roosters stir in the yard. Horses snort and stamp in the stables. The guards change once more, weary men replaced by weary men. Inside, the barracks stirs. A soldier sits up, rubbing his eyes. Another stretches, joints stiff from cold. The night is ending, though not in warmth or comfort, only in the slow certainty that day has come. The soldier rises too, shaking straw from his cloak, running a hand across his face. His body aches, but he has survived another night. He has learned again that sleep does not need to be perfect. It does not need to be long. It only needs to be enough to carry him into the next day. And so, with heavy steps, he prepares for another day of watch, another day of drills, another day of enduring until night comes again. And when night comes, it will be the same straw, the same cloaks, the same wind, the same restless sleep, broken but enduring. For in the rhythm of these nights lies the rhythm of medieval life, steady, harsh, but always continuing. So as you drift now, think of these long nights not as distant history, but as echoes of human endurance. Men who endured discomfort, cold and restless sleep, not because they wished to, but because they had no choice. Their nights are gone, but the memory of them lingers, quiet, like embers in the dark. And as you rest, let their patience guide you. Let the long, slow rhythm of their nights carry you into sleep, where time softens, where the cold fades, where you are safe, as they once hoped to be. Have you ever wondered what a soldier thought about most on a freezing night in a medieval castle? It was not always battle, it was not always duty. More often than not, it was something simple: warmth, food, and the hope of a little rest. As you settle into listening now, let your breathing slow. Imagine you are there, in the echoing halls of stone, where every sound carries, and where a soldier's comfort depends on the smallest things: a crust of bread, a sip of ale, or a shared story before sleep. Let the rhythm of these details carry you, steady and soft, until the pictures in your mind feel distant, like dreams you are already half entering. The evening begins after duties are done. The sun sinks behind the battlements, and shadows spread across the yard. Guards are posted, gates checked, weapons inspected. With the business of the day complete, men look to the hearths, to the kitchens, and to the promise of something warm to fill their stomachs. Food is never abundant, not for common soldiers. Meat is rare, often reserved for the lord and his household. The men receive what is left: broth made from bones, barley thickened with whatever scraps can be spared, or peas and beans boiled into a heavy plain stew. Bread accompanies it, hard, dark, sometimes days old. Yet to a hungry soldier it is enough. The warmth of stew against the lips, the chew of coarse bread, the weight of food in the belly, all of it helps prepare the body for the long, cold hours of night. The meal is not eaten in silence. Even in exhaustion, soldiers talk. Some joke quietly, telling stories to distract from the monotony of their lives. Others grumble about the food, about the cold, about the endless duties that never change. A few sit apart, weary and withdrawn. Eating quickly and saving little for later, ale is the soldier's comfort. Weak by modern standards, but strong enough to warm the blood, it eases the mind, softens the edge of hunger, and brings a brief sense of calm. A mug passed between hands is more than drink. It is ritual. It tells the soldier, the day is ending, the night is near. Soon there will be rest. After the meal, some men linger by the fire, stretching hands toward the flames, faces glowing in the flickering light. The warmth is fleeting, but precious. Sparks crackle upward, disappearing into the dark air of the hall. Shadows play across the walls, and for a few moments, the cold feels distant. But the fire cannot follow them to their beds. Wood is scarce, too valuable to waste. Fires are rationed. Only in the great hall does a true blaze roar. In the barracks, only a brazier glows, its warmth fading after hours. And so, when the last scraps are eaten and mugs drained, men reluctantly rise, leaving the comfort of the hearth behind. Some carry with them small tokens of warmth. A soldier may save a crust of bread, not to eat but to chew slowly during the night. Another may wrap a rag around his hands or stuff straw into his boots for extra padding. A few whisper short prayers, crossing themselves, asking protection against the cold, against sickness, against bad dreams. These little rituals are not commanded. They are personal, born of habit and need. The barracks is waiting. Straw beds lie in rows, cloaks spread thinly across them. The air is colder here than in the hall. Soldiers settle slowly, their bodies heavy with fatigue, but their minds restless. One man lies down immediately, pulling his cloak tight, turning his back to the others. Another sits a while longer, sharpening a knife by the dim glow of the brazier, delaying the moment he must lie on the hard straw. In the corner, two men whisper. They share a story of home, of families left behind, of summers that feel impossibly far away. Their words are quiet, meant not to disturb, but to soothe. Conversation dwindles as one after another succumbs to drowsiness. Soon, only the sound of breathing remains, uneven, broken by coughs or sighs, and yet not all sleep comes easily. The meal in the belly may bring warmth, but the cold is insistent. The night presses down, creeping into bones and joints. Men shift, searching for comfort that does not come. Some curl tightly into balls, conserving heat. Others share space, back to back, letting their bodies trade warmth in silence. A soldier closes his eyes and recalls the taste of his meal. It is a memory, but it lingers. A reminder of small comforts in a life of hardship. He imagines himself full, content, and for a time, this thought is enough to carry him towards sleep. Outside, the castle is quiet but alive. Dogs bark distantly, horses shift in their stalls, the wind claws at shutters and howls through arrow slits. Snow gathers silently in the courtyard. The guards walk their rounds, stamping feet, gripping spears, keeping themselves awake with muttered words and the promise that soon their watch will end and they too will eat, drink, and rest. Time passes slowly. The soldier stirs, wakes briefly, then drifts again. Dreams come, vague and fractured. In one, he sits at a table heavy with food, eating freely, never cold. In another, he is home, wrapped in familiar blankets, hearing his mother's voice. But dreams shift quickly, turning strange, blurred, unfinished. The brazier glows lower. The warmth fades. Sleep becomes shallower, broken by the ache of cold. Still, it is enough. Enough to carry him into morning. Enough to prepare him for the next day of duty. For the medieval soldier, there was no true comfort in sleep, only survival. Food filled the belly, ale softened the mind, rituals calmed the heart. But in the end, the cold was always there. And yet, night after night, he endured. You listen now? Perhaps you feel the weight of that endurance, the rhythm of lives long past. Soldiers ate, drank, prayed, and slept, not for glory, but simply to wake again, to serve again, to endure again. In this rhythm, there is a strange peace, a recognition that life does not need to be perfect to continue. And so, as you drift, let yourself find comfort in the thought that even in the hardest of nights, there was warmth in small things, in bread, in ale, in prayer, in company. Let those images carry you, soft and steady, until sleep comes gently, just as it did for the soldiers of the castle long ago. Have you ever wondered what the very last hours of a soldier's winter night inside a medieval castle felt like? We have walked through the barracks, heard the creak of timbers in the wind, felt the straw scratching at tired skin, and listened to the endless songs of the cold. We have explored the meals that warmed them, the fires that flickered in the darkness, and the slow rhythm of men drifting into uneasy rest. But the night inside a castle was not simply about lying still until dawn. There were shifts, changes, moments of silence broken by duty, and the strange half-dreams that came when one eye had to remain open. Tonight, we step into the closing hours of that long medieval winter night and follow the soldiers as they pass from sleep to waking, from stillness to the stirrings of another day. The castle never fully slept. At any hour, there were men on guard. A knight's fortress could not afford to be careless, for danger rarely announced itself politely. Enemies might creep through the dark, scaling walls, or slipping through gates. Even allies could become foes, and the coldest nights often hid the boldest raids. So while most soldiers lay in their straw pallets, huddled together for warmth, Others trudged along the battlements, stamping their feet against the chill, gripping their cloaks tightly, their breath visible in the moonlight. Those guards looked down upon a silent courtyard where even the dogs curled close to their kennels. The stables below were filled with the heavy, steady breathing of horses, their warm bodies steaming faintly in the cold. Sometimes a soldier on watch leaned close to a brazier placed at intervals along the wall, the fire crackling softly, its light trembling across the stone. He might whisper a prayer or murmur a curse at the cold, or simply stare into the night, counting the hours until relief arrived. Inside the barracks, time moved differently. Soldiers slept in clusters, their bodies forming pockets of shared warmth. A cloak might be stretched across 2 or 3 men, and though no one would have admitted it proudly, survival depended on closeness. The crackle of the brazier at the far end of the room still offered some comfort, even to those who lay in shadow. But the fire was never enough to truly banish the cold. Some men dreamed of sunlight, of green fields, of harvests long past. Others muttered in their sleep, calling names, perhaps of family, perhaps of comrades lost. Dreams in a medieval castle were not taken lightly. Many believed they carried messages. A nightmare of falling from a tower might be seen as a warning. A vision of food might be read as a promise, or as a cruel trick of hunger. As the night deepened, silence never lasted for long. A cough from one corner, the shifting of a man rolling onto his side, the sudden clatter of a rat knocking over a small piece of wood. These were the tiny intrusions of life that kept the barracks from ever sinking into perfect quiet. Yet in that steady background of noise, sleep was still possible, heavy and dream-laden. Hours before dawn, the change of the watch occurred. A soft voice shook men awake. Those who had been sleeping sat up, blinking, groaning, pulling cloaks tightly around themselves as they prepared to step out into the night. Their comrades, equally weary, returned from the walls, stamping their boots to knock loose the frost, rubbing their hands, their faces pale with cold. This rotation of duty meant that many soldiers never slept for more than a handful of hours at a stretch. True, deep rest was rare. Fatigue was a constant companion, one that blurred the lines between wakefulness and dream. In those moments between sleeping and waking, the mind often wandered. Soldiers thought of home, of fields they had once worked, of parents or wives or children waiting beyond distant villages. The stone walls that surrounded them might keep out the enemy, but they also kept in longing, and in silence, those thoughts grew sharper. Men shared less in the night, not because they had nothing to say, but because the weight of darkness seemed to press words back into the chest. Outside, the winter sky shifted slowly. Clouds parted and the moon glimmered through arrow slits, casting pale light across the barrack floor. Sometimes snow fell silently, piling up against the gates, blanketing the courtyard in white. The soldiers inside would not see it until morning, but they could feel it in the colder breath of the air, in the way the wind carried flakes against the shutters. Dawn, when it finally came, was not a sudden blaze of light, but a slow lifting of shadow. First, the sky grew faintly gray, and with it came the stirrings of life within the castle. The roosters crowed, horses stamped and whinnied in their stalls. Servants moved through the halls carrying kindling, rousing fires that had burned low. Bells sometimes rang softly to mark the hour, their tones echoing across the frozen walls. In the barracks, men stirred reluctantly, eyes blinked open, cloaks were pulled tighter around shoulders. Some groaned as stiff joints reminded them of the stone beneath the straw. A few muttered prayers of thanks for making it through another night. For soldiers, survival itself was never guaranteed, not even in the safety of walls. Cold, disease, hunger, all were as dangerous as an enemy's sword. Breakfast was meager. Perhaps a crust of bread, hard and tough, dipped into weak ale to soften it. Perhaps a ladle of thin pottage, the remains of yesterday's stew stretched with water. On good days, salted meat or fish might appear, but such luxuries could not be counted on. Yet even the simplest meal was precious, for it marked the start of a new day, the proof that the night's endurance had been worthwhile. And so the rhythm of soldierly life continued. Night after night, winter after winter, the pattern repeated. Guard duty, rest, cold, dreams, dawn. It was a cycle that shaped not just the body, but the spirit, a reminder that life in a medieval castle was as much about patience as about courage. For us, imagining these long nights may seem almost unbearable, but for the soldiers who lived them, this was simply life. They adapted, they endured, and in their endurance, they laid the foundation for the very history we now whisper back into the quiet of our own nights. So, as you let your eyes grow heavy, think of those long-forgotten soldiers, wrapped in rough wool cloaks, lying on straw in the shadows of stone walls, their dreams carrying them through the cold until the pale light of morning touched the sky. And now, a question for you, posed in the spirit of those long medieval winters. If you were a soldier in a frozen castle forced to choose, would you take the warmth of an extra blanket or the comfort of a mug of ale before sleep? Let me know your answer in the comments below, and may your night be warmer than theirs ever was.